So today I wanted to share with you a little journey that I've been on. A couple of years ago at university, I studied a book called A Secular Age by Charles Taylor. It's a big chunker of a book. We're definitely in the 800s of pages. And I remember we only did, like a small section of it because that's really all you can do in 13 weeks. And I remember thinking, man, this book is so great and there's so much good stuff in here, but I don't think people are really going to read it, especially not the people that I want to be reading it. So over time, I kind of got this idea. I'm very visual. I like to figure out how things work. So I set about on a little journey. So I would read the book and I would write notes of what I understood of what was happening. And I started turning those notes into cartoons. Just little kind of images of how I understood the concept. And I didn't really know what was going to happen with that at that point, but I knew that I kind of wanted to do it. Well, as it turned out, this little process has turned into a podcast called Contemplating Culture that I do with one of my sisters, Kathryn. So we take these ideas and concepts and we discuss them. And we look at particularly the implication that they have for missionaries today. What does it mean to be a missionary in a secular age? What does it mean to try and evangelize? And how is the world that we're in affecting us as missionaries as well? So today I wanted to present to you the summary of chapter 1 and the introduction. So that's season 1 of the podcast. And I wanted to present to you 5 tips for evangelizing in a secular age. So this is kind of like a 2 parts. There's like a 1-point summary and then a tip that goes with it. So summary point number 1 is that where we are matters. So the world, you might have noticed, has changed a lot and the rate of change is quite fast, which means that it's quite possible that your mindset is still operating from how things were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. But in order to be effective evangelists today, we need to understand what the world looks like today. One of the things that Charles Taylor talks about is this idea of what do we mean when we say the word secular? Does secular mean a separation between the holy things and the non-holy things? Does secular mean I believe or I don't believe, I'm an atheist? Or does secular mean something a little bit more? Does it mean just the new sphere of things where faith and belief is just one thing among many? And it's not over and against unbelief. Sometimes there's this profound mixture and tension where people can take a bit of all different kinds of things that seem contradictory, but in the world that we're in today, that's what secular means. And he calls this secular 3. But that's not important. What's important, I think, is how we conceptualize this in order to be effective. And for me, I like to think of it as a marketplace, that maybe at one point in time, the church kind of saw itself as, like a fortress on a hill. Like, we need to keep everything that's not holy out, and we need to drag all the people in. And maybe especially that turned into evangelizing in terms of getting people to mass. Like, once you get people to mass on a Sunday, they're inside and they're safe. And then their job is to then bring more people in. But I think that that's not really the way things are at the moment. And that excludes a whole bunch of good, Jesus-loving people. And there's so many of them in my life as well. That people that wouldn't fit into that model. But if that's all we're evangelizing for, if that's the model that we're operating out of, I think our evangelization is really missing something. So tip number 1 is to consider the marketplace. Consider that things are not just black and white. It's possible for people to not be going to church and to believe in Jesus as their savior. It's possible for people to be into, all kinds of things that you might think are against church teaching, for example, but still be going to mass on a Sunday. That attending mass, not attending mass, saying you're Catholic, saying that you're not Catholic anymore, that's not really a good indication anymore of the sphere of where people might be. And so when we're evangelizing, I think it's really important to get into our head, have a very clear understanding of how do I understand the world at the moment and what is the goal of my evangelizing effort here? Am I just trying to get people from point A to point B? Or am I willing to be with them on the journey? To be wandering around the marketplace with them, to, rather than separating myself from the narrative if I don't like it, to find my place within the narrative. Rather than escaping to the hilltops and waiting for people to come up or dragging them up, to come down into the city, into the village, and to be able to have conversations with people, to take time to really get to know what's going on. Summary point number 2, we're looking at the pursuit of fullness and the anxiety of death. What does this mean? Well, let's look at fullness to begin. And I think there's so many different ways that people understand what it is to have a full life. This has been the work of philosophers for thousands of years, really. And I guess it's part of the quest of every human life as well, to discover what it means for me to be living a full life. But one of the things that Taylor wants us to think about is that this will be impacted by our worldview, by what we think happens in the world, and then beyond this life as well. That if you get to death and there's an open door, and you consider that there's more beyond the door, that might have an impact on what you think fullness of life looks like now and how you pursue it. So Charles Taylor says that there's 3 things that kind of contribute to this sense of human fullness. So the first one is happiness. I remember my ethics lecturer at university said, you can keep asking a person why they're doing something, but when you get to the answer of it makes me happy, you kind of don't need any more than that. That we in our human selves know that happiness is some kind of endpoint that we're working towards for fulfillment. The second one is fulfillment in itself, something around purpose or identity, and it might look different for everyone as to what that exactly looks like, but something that makes us feel full. And the third one is contribution to the good. So I know, for example, even non-Christian people that would say, I want to leave the world a better place than I found it. So maybe that's what contribution to the good looks like. Maybe it's Mary MacKillop, never see a need without doing something about it, right? There's so many different expressions of this. And so I kind of had this visually when I was exploring this. I was thinking about if when you get to death, you're imagining like a brick wall kind of thing, like there's nothing beyond that. There's suddenly a lot of pressure to try and get the most out of all of these 3 things, happiness, fulfillment, and contribution to the good, before you hit death's wall, right? But I found that even people of faith, even people that look at death's door, it might be slightly ajar, fully open, it doesn't matter, but if you're considering that there's more beyond that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're free of the anxiety to fill up all your time, all your energy with trying to get the most happiness, the most fulfillment, the most contribution to the good. And I think one of the ways that we see this expressed really poignantly in our world at the moment is FOMO, right? It's like, I can't let there be something good that I'm not a part of. Like, that makes me sad because I feel less because of it. It's exhausting to try to carry so many different priorities and tensions and hold them all. And I think that there's a freedom that exists for us in being able to not be the only one carrying the load on all 3 at all times. And I guess that's the real gift of faith that we have to bring people in evangelization. That it's not just about trying to fill them up as much as you can, trying to carry them all so that you've got everything you need by the time you get to the end, but knowing that it's okay if I'm not doing all the work to make this happen, because we have Jesus. We have a person who's with us on the way, who, even if we're not striving for our happiness, brings us joy, brings us true joy when we're just living in the will of his Father. So one of the other things that Charles Taylor talks about is this whole idea of what happens around death. So he talks about in the pagan world, there was this notion of Hades, right? And a fear of the people that had died that were in Hades, because Hades was an afterlife, but it just kind of wasn't as good as life on earth. So obviously people on earth were afraid that people in Hades were going to come back, right? And this whole notion of ghosts and being haunted by spirits coming back from the dead, that kind of notion, right? So you're scared of death because you're scared of what might come back. So I don't know, it's kind of where you get this whole notion of like rest in peace, like stay there, stay dead. But then you get this Christian kind of movement that comes through, right? And you get a new anxiety that comes about around death, which is, am I going to go to the right place when I die? When I come to judgment, am I going to be okay? And so we have this period of a few hundred, maybe even 1,000 years where this is starting to get worked out, What does it mean to die? And the anxiety of death starts to shift. What's really fascinating is then that's what is one of the factors that enables indulgences to take off, because there's so much anxiety around death that it gives people a place to put that anxiety of, I can do something about my fears around death. But the thing that I find really fascinating is I think we kind of still have indulgences, just in different ways, right? It's like, what do you do to alleviate the anxiety you have around dying? And it might be, like you're putting your energy into a health kick now, or into the right diet now, or, like maximizing those three things that we talked about in fulfillment, trying to maximize those now. And I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think it's important to be able to allow expressions of all of our fears and hopes and worries to find places in our lives. But I just think it's fascinating to notice where that energy is going. So the tip for evangelizing with this in mind is to question the destination. Now, I've been in a number of conversations with people that would say that they don't believe in God, or they don't really have faith, definitely don't practice in any faith, but they've had near-death experiences that are so similar across the board. They experience this place of being in peace, they experience some kind of presence or light that's drawing them, right? You're probably familiar with that kind of story. And it's those kind of little moments that people see a crack, that maybe it's not a wall at the end, maybe there is something beyond there. And that's the moment when you can start getting people curious about what's beyond death. Because what you think happens when you die is going to really impact how you live. So that's the tip, is help people question the destination. They might not see how God is important for their life right now, but build the picture for them, build the bigger narrative, help them see that there might be more than what they can see and experience right now. So our third summary point is looking at naiveties and pain points. No matter if you're a believer or an unbeliever, wherever you sit in the human spectrum of belief, Charles Taylor would say that you carry naiveties. It's just how we are. And some might be more overt than others. But for example, like atheists might be looking at people of faith thinking they're just weak, they need a crutch. They might not be consciously thinking this, but underneath it's kind of like what's happening. People of faith might be looking at unbelievers thinking, they just don't know. Like maybe if they knew, if someone told them, maybe then they'd understand why, they need God. And all of these little naiveties that we're living out of, unconscious, maybe even mindsets, set us up that we're in a place where there's going to be some kind of pain. And Taylor is talking particularly for unbelievers. There's a number of different stances that they might be positioning themselves in. And this is going to be really important for us in evangelizing, because it's the exact same pain points, I think, that advertising agencies, marketing uses to exploit people. So for some people, this means that they just see reason as God. Like if I can work things out in my mind, that's all there is, and I can decide what everything outside me means or what impact it's going to have on me. For other people, it's this pursuit of harmony. I can see harmony out there and I want to try create that within. And for other people, it might be, I'm part of this story and I've got to work to fit in, to make ends meet, all those kinds of things. There's lots of different stances that people might be in. And then he talks about the king of unbelief, which is effectively nihilism, that nothing means anything, and I'm the one who has the courage to acknowledge that nothing means anything. And so I can just sit on my throne. But the thing is that each of these has a point of pain. And this is the tip. Notice the pain point. So for someone who's living in the work to survive mentality, there's no rest. There's no Sabbath. There's no sense of rhythm. It's just all one thing. And so these are the people that are going to be, targeted for holidays. Like, you've earned it. You deserve this. Like, treat yourself really well because you're working so hard. And for other people, there's going to be a sense of lacking joy, lacking intimacy, that because I'm so caught up in my mind and in reason in trying to figure things out, I've distanced myself from people and the meaning of things outside of me. And so there's going to be this craving for intimacy, for vulnerability, all those kinds of things. For the people that are working towards the inner harmony, we see it a lot in the New Age, right? Try this meditation, try this new method of exercise, try this thing. And it's like an endless project. But because people are on board with the endless project, the marketing world has so much access into them. And so for us as missionaries, as evangelists in this world, this is the tip, is to notice the pain points. Notice where there's grief or loss or longing in others, but also in ourselves, and allow the gospel to speak the truth there. That Jesus does come to bring us joy and intimacy, to bring us true rest. And for the king of unbelief, Jesus comes to bring us purpose, that there is a meaning to everything. Now, the really important thing about all of these stances and all of these pain points is that it's not like we're locked in, right? Because we live in this marketplace world where we can see everything else that's happening. So we're going to have moments of really firmly being convicted of something. But it also means that we're really open to moments of doubting or questioning, or at least entertaining something different. And so our job as evangelists is to be with people on this journey, in those moments of openness, to be there for them with the gospel, with the truth that is going to be able to meet their needs and not cost them anything in the way that the marketing world wants to take money from them. So this brings us to summary point number 4, which is the buffered self. So if you go back 500, 600, 700 years ago, the world is very enchanted for humans. Everything kind of has like a mystery to it, especially in nature, right? There's like a mystical kind of hidden purpose. Maybe there's spirits in the forest, or things have meaning. When this thing happens in nature, it means that this thing is going to happen. Like there's all this interconnectedness. And through a number of different kind of avenues of exploration and disenchanting the world, what we've inherited now is a disenchanted world. That those people naively looked at the forest and said, there's spirits there. I want to be safe in the forest, not just from people, but from other forces that might be there. And we naively now look at the forest or the natural world in general and think, well, that's a tree and that's an ocean and that's a regular animal. There's no kind of hidden meaning behind things. But what it means for us is that we've developed this sense of being buffered. We're now the source of meaning. We're the meaning makers. There's no hidden meaning out there. It's in us. It's in, especially in our mind, right? Like what we can figure out, what makes sense to us. We get to say, this is what's happening. The downside of this for us is it means that we're now at a distance from nature in a way that we weren't before. You can see it, I think, especially, say, in the Australian context, in the relationship that our Indigenous Australians have with the land, right? You can see a connection with the land, with the nature around them, with the elements of their being part of the bigger story of creation, that in a Western mindset, we just don't have. And it's not saying one's right or wrong, but it's just saying that I know I definitely experience it. When I look at my Indigenous brothers and sisters, I long for that kind of intimacy with creation, of just like a feeling of belonging, being part of it in a way. You multiply this across a whole spectrum of different things. And what we have now is a humanity that really craves intimacy and vulnerability. And I think it's one of the reasons why, for example, Brené Brown's work has found so much resonance, because people know that we have become very distant from each other. Not just in our workplaces or with creation, but even in our families, that things can become so functional, so I've got to protect what you see of me, and I've got to present the right version of myself. And because I can curate all of this, I can curate what meaning there is and what different things mean. It just means that there's so many barriers between us and other things. So this tip for evangelizing is to nurture vulnerability. And even though she's not necessarily doing it from a gospel perspective, I think Brene Brown gives us a really good example of what this looks like. That there is a hunger and a craving in our world, in the human person at the moment, for vulnerability. To really get to know spaces that it's safe to be vulnerable. To say, this is what I'm feeling, this is what I'm scared of. Because the thing is that if we're closed off to other people, to creation, it means we're also going to be closed off to God. God's spirit can really only find a home in us when we're willing to be vulnerable to let him in. Not that we of course have to be good stewards, and I'm not saying let everything in, but I think definitely creating spaces and relationships and groups that are going to be safe places for us to lean into vulnerability, to nurture it. Because sometimes I think the amount that we're protecting ourselves is actually hurting us. And so summary point number 5 from our first season in Contemplating Culture is the loss of a common sense of time and the ascent of anxiety. Now, this is quite a long sentence, but what does it mean? Well, I grew up in a world where time is money, time is a resource, right? Time is uniform, that there is seconds and minutes and hours, and each one has its own value, and each one is chronological, sequential, right? So I got really fascinated reading this part of A Secular Age, because Taylor was talking about a different way of viewing time. And I kind of liken it to something like a spiral, right? That I see time as in a straight line, and this event that happened 1,000 years ago is 1,000 years separated from this event happening now. And the day after that is one day further away, right? But in this sense of higher time, you're not looking at it as a line, you're looking at it from above. So this spiral, right? So this event here that happened 1,000 years ago, say Good Friday, is perfectly aligned with this moment happening right here, which is Good Friday, or the Last Supper with every Mass. From above, they're perfectly aligned, even though chronologically there's quite a lot that's happened. And so this is not just in things of faith, but in all kinds of things. I think we get a sense of it when we think about, say, an anniversary, right? An anniversary holds some meaning. It's not just a day. There's something already in that day that's sitting there. So that sense of common sense of time, that I don't need to go into every moment trying to find its purpose, trying to not waste it, trying to make the most out of it. And I was trying to get a sense of, well, what is it that I have now, and what is it that has been lost, I guess. So I was trying to think of a way that this kind of looked conceptually for me. What do I have now, and what is it that I didn't inherit, and what would that look like? Well, like I said, I've inherited time as units, and I was thinking, it's kind of like, there's the 9 a.m. bottle, the 10 a.m. bottle, the 11 a.m. bottle, and these are all empty vessels. And so when I get to 9 a.m., I've got between 9 and 10 a.m. to fill up that bottle with whatever its most significant thing is going to be. Whatever I'm meant to be doing in that time, I've got to do it. Because if I get to 10 a.m. and I haven't done it, I've now wasted that bottle of time. I can't go back and fill it up. Now I've got to look at my 10 to 11 bottle, and I've got to try to do the work to make sure that I've done the best with that. And it happens for every period of time, right? I was thinking, well, how else could it be? And I was thinking about, like going on a hike, right? You're going on this journey up the mountain and down, and you don't get to a certain point on the mountain and like, right, what am I going to do here to make sure that this is the best mountain experience possible? Because the view is already there. And so for me, this sense of common time is, rather than what do I need to do right now, just being where I am and looking at what's there, looking at the beauty of what's there, or what the meaning is already there. It's something like that. Something of what's been lost is the peace. I think it's less stressful, just to be able to, like, rather than trying to work, just turn around and see what is the view from where I am right now. And so Charles Taylor links this with an ascent of anxiety. So he talks about, I guess, the world post-Reformations. So there's been wars and plagues and religious upheaval and government upheaval and all of these things happening. And any little thing could destabilize someone's whole existence, right? So it's like all these little pointed things balancing on top of each other, and that's the platform where they're sitting. So everything is kind of just like this state of anxiety of anything could happen. And I think in a way we've kind of inherited that. I look at the rate of change of even just say with the AI revolution at the moment, like every week the way that things are being done is changing, and it's quite exhausting to keep up with. And it means that there's jobs that exist now that might not exist next year, which is just baffling. But it means that in our own way, we're destabilized as well. So tip number 5 is to get to know the gears. I think one of the things that can very easily happen to us when we lose that sense of common higher time and we're just operating at a chronological time is that we become workhorses, right? We become operating at one speed all the time, trying to make the most out of every moment. And I think one of the gifts that the love of God brings us is rhythm and rest. That's what he comes to bring us rest, right? He comes to bring us life and joy. And work is part of that, but so is recreation. So is times of joy and intimacy. So are times of giving to others. So I guess our job for ourselves and also evangelizing others is to help people not create gods out of the resource of time, but rather to be okay to rest into the rhythms that are already there. It's important. It's what's good for us. Help people regain the view of the meaning, the value, the importance of what is already there. So I'll run through our 5 summary points and 5 tips again. So where we think we are matters, consider the marketplace. The pursuit of fullness and the anxiety of death, question the destination. Naiveties and pain points, notice the pain points. The buffered self, nurture vulnerability. The loss of a common sense of time and the ascent of anxiety, get to know the gears. And I say this because I think the first evangelization is always with ourselves. If we work on these things for ourselves, it's only then that we can really know how to take them out in a way that brings life to others. So if you want to know more and continue to join the conversation around these things, love you to check out the podcast, Contemplating Culture. You can find it on anywhere that you listen to good podcasts.